Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're digging into something pretty fascinating, actually. It's about the changing global footprint of Japanese expatriates. For years, this seemed like a really predictable trend, but our sources, which are pulling from recent demographic analysis and corporate reports, they show something else entirely. Decades of steady growth have suddenly shifted. It's a massive change, really complex, and honestly still unfolding.
Yeah, that's right.
So our mission here is to get behind those top line numbers. We want to understand the forces that are actually redrawing this map of where Japanese citizens are living and working abroad. We're looking at, well, a mix of things: financial stress, big changes in how companies staff their overseas operations, and also just the human side of living abroad. Where are these communities shrinking? Where are they growing, sometimes in unexpected places? And crucially, what does all this tell us about maybe the future of global work?
Absolutely. And what jumps out right away from the material is this phrase, a notable shift. It's more than just a temporary dip. It looks like a structural change. It really challenges the assumptions people have held for, well, a generation. And it's not just a simple reaction to the pandemic either. These movements seem driven by some very deliberate corporate strategies and, frankly, a hard look at the costs of keeping large expat groups in those traditional expensive hubs.
Okay, let's unpack that right away.
Yeah.
The biggest headline here seems to be this reversal of a 3-decade norm.
hmm
We sort of got used to the idea that the number of Japanese citizens living overseas was always going up. From 1989 right through to 2019, it was just a continuous upward line.
That's a really crucial point. For 30 years, that number only went one way. It felt like a given, a symbol of Japan's globalization. But the data clearly shows that growth trend hitting a wall in 2020. And it didn't just stop. It started falling and kept declining into 2023. This isn't just stagnation. It points to a pretty significant return migration, people moving back to Japan. It's like watching this huge ship that's been sailing east for decades suddenly turn around.
Wow. And when we look at where this turnaround is happening most sharply, it's not in minor locations, is it?
No, not at all.
The sources are highlighting that the decline is really concentrated in these long-established centers of power. Cities like Shanghai, a huge base for Japanese manufacturing and finance for so long, in New York, both have seen really sharp drops in their Japanese populations. It seems like they're the main points for this return flow.
So the obvious question is, why now? You might think, okay, COVID must be the main reason. But the documents suggest the primary drivers are more sustained. Severe economic pressures. We're talking about the cost of living just rising so fast that these assignments become incredibly difficult to maintain, maybe even untenable for many. And it's not just general inflation. It's the specific cost of things like quality international schools, the crazy housing costs in major cities, and maybe even currency fluctuations making local expenses bite harder.
Okay, so that economic squeeze is pushing people out of those traditional, very high-cost centers. But is that same thing happening everywhere? What about Southeast Asia? That region's always been such a cornerstone for Japanese companies.
That's where the story gets a bit more nuanced. It shifts from just economics to uh, corporate strategy, really. Southeast Asia is also seeing a downward trend in Japanese expat numbers. But the main reason seems different from why people are leaving New York or Shanghai. Companies are making a strategic choice. They're pivoting away from relying solely on those long-term expensive assignments for Japanese managers. They're actively moving toward localization.
Localization. Explain that a bit more. Isn't the standard approach to put a Japanese manager in charge to, maintain the corporate culture and reporting lines?
Historically, yes, that was often the default. But think about how these markets have matured. Companies are realizing that the local talent pools in places like Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, they're deep now. They're highly skilled. And crucially, they often have a much better, more nuanced grasp of the local market, consumer tastes, the regulatory environment. So local managers are increasingly stepping into roles that might have traditionally gone to an assigned Japanese executive. It's a strategic shift that says we need that local insight embedded in leadership, not just supervision from headquarters.
Interesting. So it's less about just cutting costs, although that might be a factor, and more about being more effective, more responsive in these really competitive regional markets.
Precisely. It suggests a move away from just exporting the headquarters culture towards actively importing local expertise. And this might mean different kinds of assignments, too. Maybe shorter, more focused trips for knowledge transfer rather than those classic 5-year postings.
Which I guess increases the need for more flexible ways for business travelers to live and work if they're moving between markets more often for shorter periods.
Definitely. That kind of fluid movement across the Asia-Pacific region demands flexible living solutions. People need places they can settle into quickly for a few weeks or months without long leases.
That makes sense. But the sources also flag another factor, a more personal one, the rise of dual income couples. How is that playing into this?
Ah, yes. That's a really significant point mentioned in the document. Dual-income couples are, understandably, increasingly hesitant about uprooting for an overseas assignment. If one partner gets offered a great role in, say, Bangkok, what does that mean for the other partner's career? Often, it means putting a successful career on hold, or even quitting. That reluctance is making it harder for companies to fill those traditional expat roles, especially in key hubs like Thailand. It's changing the calculation for families.
And I suppose for the companies that do successfully place employees, especially those dual career families or people on shorter assignments, the demand for high quality, flexible living options must be shooting up.
It has to be. When the assignment isn't a guaranteed 5-year stint, or when a family is wary of committing to a standard rental, the value of reliable, comfortable, extended stay options like service departments becomes huge. Professionals, project teams moving around Asia Pacific, they need places that are ready to go, comfortable, set up for work, whether it's for 3 weeks or 6 months. That flexibility is key for the company and for the employee trying to balance work and life.
Yeah, it really paints a picture of a shift not just in who is moving, but how they live and work once they get there. Maybe the era of just rotating HQ staff into long term leases is fading, replaced by something more adaptable, more regional. Okay, let's pivot now. We've talked about the overall decline and the shrinking numbers in the big traditional destinations like the US and China, even though, yes, they still host the majority of Japanese expats.
Right.
But the really intriguing part for me is where the growth is happening, because it's not where you might expect.
Exactly. This is where you see the map of, let's say, Japanese global focus being redrawn in real time. While the established centers contract because of cost or strategy changes, we see noticeable growth in Japanese residents in regions that weren't traditional hotspots. The data points clearly to increases in Africa, the Middle East, Central America, and Oceania.
Wow. That sounds like a very deliberate diversification,
Yeah.
chasing new opportunities, maybe spreading risk. Can we speculate on what kinds of industries might be driving this growth in these, well, less traditional regions?
We can probably connect some dots based on broader investment trends. For the Middle East, especially the Gulf states, you'd think energy, right? But also high-tech infrastructure.
Mm.
Japanese companies are big players in hydrogen, renewables, smart city projects there. In Africa, growth is likely tied to major infrastructure, railways, ports, maybe resource extraction projects. Central America and Oceania, that could be more niche, specialized manufacturing, agriculture, perhaps targeted development aid projects, or even logistics hubs.
This is really fascinating because it suggests companies and maybe individuals too are moving beyond those long-standing, comfortable relationships.
Hmm.
The post-war ties with the US, the big manufacturing push into China.
Mhm.
It points towards seeking out genuinely new opportunities, often in places that probably require more effort, more of a pioneering spirit.
It definitely implies a greater strategic appetite for, let's say, less charted territory. And maybe it's a necessary move. Perhaps the biggest growth potential for many Japanese sectors now lies outside those saturated markets in the West and East Asia. These feel like investments in the future, often involving smaller, highly specialized teams rather than building huge expat communities right away.
Okay, we've spent a lot of time on the big picture, the demographics, the corporate strategies. Let's bring it down to the human level for a moment. If companies are sending these smaller, specialized teams to new places, maybe Central Africa or remote parts of Oceania, the challenge of just adapting, of building a support network must be huge.
Oh, it's absolutely critical, and maybe even more critical when you don't have that large, established Japanese community to plug into. The sources bring up something really powerful here. The role of community building activities as like essential social support. Particularly for Japanese expats across Asia, things like organized sports rugby is mentioned specifically have become really fundamental for building connections. It turns professional contacts into genuine friendships.
I like that detail because it goes beyond just work networking. It's about that tangible connection to home, to culture, especially when families might be navigating a challenging move. And the specific example they mention is the annual Asian Japanese Rugby Cup, the AJRC. It apparently started way back in 1997.
Yeah, the fact that the AJRC has been running for so long really speaks volumes about this ongoing need for organized, culturally familiar community support.
Yeah.
It brings together Japanese expats from all over the continent. They share experiences, build that sense of shared identity, and it helps ease what can be a really difficult transition. That network becomes incredibly important when you're sorting out the practicalities of life in a new country.
And the scale is impressive too. It's not just a few friends kicking a ball around. It sounds like a serious effort to connect the diaspora. This year's tournament, I think you said in Malaysia, is expecting up to 17 teams.
That's right, up to 17 teams. It just shows the power of a shared activity, a sport in this case, to bridge geographical distances and professional differences.
It really highlights that even as corporate strategies evolve shifting towards shorter stays, more flexibility, that basic human need for a strong support network, doesn't change.
In fact, you could argue it becomes even more crucial for those people heading to the newer growth regions, where they might be among the first wave, and that large, ready-made community just doesn't exist yet. So just to quickly pull together the three main takeaways from our discussion for you, the listener. First, recognize this huge reversal. The decades-long growth of Japanese living abroad has flipped. There's significant return migration happening, largely pushed by the high costs in places like New York and Shanghai. Second, watch how companies are strategically shifting. They're embracing localization, hiring more local managers in key regions like Southeast Asia. This signals a lasting change in management philosophy and increases the need for flexible housing for those on shorter, project-based assignments. And third, keep an eye on the new frontiers, the unexpected growth areas Africa, the Middle East, Central America, Oceania. This is likely where a lot of future Japanese global investment and presence will be focused.
That's a really profound reshaping of global movement patterns. It really drives home that global mobility today seems less about following the old, well-worn paths and much more about being responsive. Responsive to costs, yes, but also responsive to new corporate strategies that value local talent and responsive to that fundamental human need for community, whether it's found on a rugby field or, in a well-managed extended stay apartment complex.
Which leads us to a final, perhaps provocative thought for you to mull over. We've seen how rising costs, the availability of strong local talent, and the demand for more flexible work assignments are reshaping the Japanese expatriate landscape. Could this combination of return migration from expensive hubs and diversification into new regions become the defining trend for all international business assignments in the next decade, well beyond just the Japanese experience?